The evening wind carried dust across the narrow village road as Armin walked behind the old marriage broker. The man's voice was fast and oily as he talked about the girl. "She is quiet, good at cooking, very obedient," he said, looking back again and again. Armin said little. He was a calm man, tall with a square face and rough hands from working in the city factory. His parents had died young and he had no one left except his small house and a few goats. He had saved money for years, and when he finally told the broker he was ready to marry, the man had smiled too quickly. They stopped outside a small courtyard at the edge of the village. From inside came voices hushed and sharp. The broker whispered, "Her family is shy, but they are honest people. Don't look too hard, just trust me." Armin nodded slowly. He had no reason not to trust. In his heart, he only wanted a peaceful home. Inside the house, 3 men waited. Their eyes darted between each other and none smiled. Armin greeted them politely. One of them, the oldest, said the girl's parents had died and she stayed with her husband's family. Her husband had died last year. She was young and alone, so they wanted to give her another chance at life. Armin listened quietly. He thought it was a kind thing. When they brought the girl out, she wore a thick shawl that covered her head and most of her face. She stood still, her hands shaking slightly. The old man said, "She's shy. Don't worry, she'll be a good wife." Armin tried to speak to her, but she didn't reply. He thought maybe it was the custom of her people not to talk before marriage. The broker pressed his shoulder. "It's done," he whispered. "You must give the gift money now. These people are poor." Armin didn't argue. He handed the envelope with his savings, money he had kept hidden in a wooden box for years. The old man counted quickly and smiled for the first time. "You can take her now," he said. The ceremony was simple. A local elder read a few lines. The witnesses nodded, and before Armin could understand much, the girl was his wife. She sat on the back of his cart, silent, while he led the donkey through the dusty path toward his home. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and red. Halfway home, Armin tried to talk to her. "What's your name?"
he asked gently.
She whispered something too soft to hear. He asked again, and she said, "Syra." Her voice trembled. He noticed how tightly she held the shawl around her head. "You don't have to be afraid," he said kindly. "You're safe now. We'll start new." But she didn't answer. When they reached his small house, Armin helped her down and showed her inside. He had cleaned the room that morning, spread a new sheet on the cot, and boiled some tea. He wanted to see her face properly, to welcome her with respect. "You can rest," he said. "I'll bring food." She nodded slightly. Later that night, when the moonlight fell through the window, Syra sat by the corner, her head still covered. Armin placed food before her. "You haven't eaten all day," he said. She kept her eyes down. "Please," he added softly, "don't be afraid of me." Her hands trembled as she reached for the bread. He noticed scars on her fingers, faint but old. Then he saw a drop of tear fall on her hand. "Syra?" he asked quietly. She lifted her head a little, her eyes full of pain. Then without a word, she pulled the shawl away from her head. Armin froze. Her head was completely bald. Not a single strand of hair remained. The skin was rough and red in places, as if someone had done it recently. She looked down, ashamed, waiting for him to shout or walk away. But he didn't move. He only stared in silence, trying to understand. Finally, she whispered, "They did this to me before sending me away. My husband's brothers and their wives. They said I was cursed. They said no one would marry a widow like me unless they made me look like a joke." Her voice broke as she spoke. "They laughed when they cut my hair. They said they would sell me off to anyone who would take me." Armin's hands clenched at his sides. He felt something burn inside him, not anger at her, but at the cruelty behind her story. He knelt beside her, his voice calm but strong. "You have done nothing wrong," he said. "They are the ones who should be ashamed." She looked up, surprised. "You don't hate me?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "No, hair will grow again. Dignity must not be lost. You are my wife now, and no one will laugh at you again." Syra broke down, crying quietly. It was the first time she felt someone speak to her like that since her husband's death. She had been mocked, treated like property, sold without care. Now a man she barely knew spoke to her as if she was worth something. She couldn't believe it. The next morning, Armin went to the market. People had already started talking. The broker had told others about the bald bride, laughing as he drank tea with other men. When Armin walked past, they tried to joke. "You got a fine one, brother," one shouted. "Hope she shines your head, too." The laughter followed him down the lane. Armand stopped, turned slowly and looked at them. His face was calm, but his eyes cold. "You laugh now," he said evenly. "But one day you'll see who she really is." They fell quiet. Something about his voice carried a weight they couldn't joke with. He bought cloth, some oil, and a small silver comb. When he came home, he gave them to Sarah. "For you," he said, "when your hair grows back." She touched the items as if they were something precious. "Why are you so kind to me?" she asked. "You could have left me there." He smiled faintly. "Because I saw fear in your eyes. And I don't want a wife who fears me. I want someone who can live again." That night, Syra slept peacefully for the first time in many months. Armand sat outside staring at the stars, thinking of what she had endured. In his heart, he promised he would not let her story end in shame. The next few days, he taught her to work in the garden, to feed the goats, to cook without hiding her face. At first, she hesitated to go outside, but when the children from nearby huts came to see the new bride, Armand greeted them warmly and said, "This is my wife, Syra." He said it with such simple pride that no one dared whisper. Slowly, the people who came to mock began to stop. They noticed how clean his home looked now, how Syra worked quietly, and how Armand treated her with patience. Some of the women began to greet her kindly. A few even brought oil for her head, saying softly, "It will grow again." Syra began to smile sometimes. She started humming while she worked, her voice soft and warm. One morning, as she carried water from the well, she caught her reflection in the surface. Her scalp still bare, but her eyes alive again. She touched her head and whispered, "Thank you, God, for sending him." But trouble was not gone yet. Word reached her in-laws that she was living peacefully, and they were not happy. They had expected her to be rejected, humiliated, maybe sent back. Instead, she had found kindness. That was something they could not stand. One afternoon, as Armand was fixing the fence, he saw 3 men approaching from the road. He recognized the old man who had sold her, followed by 2 others with harsh eyes. Sarah saw them too, and her face went pale. She whispered, "They've come." Armand wiped his hands and stood tall. "Let them come," he said quietly. "This time they will not touch you." The men stopped at the gate, sneering. "We've come to take her back," the oldest one said. "You were cheated. She's not fit for a wife. We'll find you someone better." Armand stepped forward, his voice calm but strong. "She is my wife. You sold her like a goat and I paid, but I didn't buy her to throw her away. I took her to give her life again." The men laughed cruelly. "You'll regret this," one said. Armand looked at them without fear. "No," he said. "You will regret what you did." The men turned away angry, but something in his tone made them uneasy. As they walked off, the villagers who had been watching from a distance came closer, whispering. They had never seen Armand speak with such fire. That night, Syra sat by the fire, her eyes wet but shining. "You stood for me," she said softly. Armand smiled faintly. "I only did what was right." But deep inside, both of them knew this was just the beginning. The cruel joke her in-laws had played was about to turn into something no one in the village would ever forget. The next morning, the village was full of whispers. Some said Armand had fought with the men who sold him the bride. Others said the girl was cursed and that her bald head was proof. But those who had seen the way Armand stood at the gate knew there was something different about this man. He did not shout, he did not bend, he simply spoke with a calmness that carried strength. Inside the small house, Syra woke early and began sweeping the yard. Her hands were still weak, but she moved with quiet purpose. The morning sun touched her smooth head, and for the first time she did not hide it. When Armand came out with a cup of tea, he stopped and looked at her. She turned shyly, but he smiled and said, "Let them see who you are. You have nothing to hide." It was not easy for her. For months before her marriage, she had lived in fear and humiliation. Now every small act of kindness from Armand felt strange, almost unbelievable. She watched him work silently, fixing the fence, feeding the goats, cleaning the tools. He never complained. He never looked down at her. It was as if her pain had become his responsibility. As days passed, Syra began to help him more. She cleaned, cooked, and even laughed sometimes when he told small stories about his days in the city. Slowly, the empty house began to feel like a home. The garden started to bloom again. The villagers who had once mocked began to stop by with excuses, bringing seeds, milk, or gossip. But their tone had changed. They no longer came to laugh. They came to listen, to watch how these two broken souls had found a way to stand tall. One afternoon, the old marriage broker came back, nervous and sweating. He looked around and said quietly, "Those men, they are angry. They said you insulted them. They might try to take revenge." Armin looked up from his work. "If they want to come, they can come in daylight," he said calmly. "I will not run." The broker hesitated. "You should leave, brother. She is only trouble." Armin's voice stayed steady. "Trouble is not the woman. Trouble is the cruelty that men call tradition." The broker said nothing more and walked away quickly, afraid of being seen. That evening, Syra found Armin sitting outside sharpening a sickle. The orange light of sunset fell on his face. She sat beside him and whispered, "You should not fight them. They are powerful." He looked at her and said gently, "I do not fight with hands. I fight with truth. They live by fear. We will live by honesty." She didn't fully understand his words then, but they sank deep in her heart. A week later, the village festival arrived. It was the first time Syra had stepped out in daylight without her shawl. She wore a simple red dress that Armin had bought her from the market. The women stared as she walked past, her bald head shining softly under the sun, her eyes bright and calm. Some whispered behind her, but others looked in quiet awe. No one had seen a woman walk with such quiet courage after such cruelty. At the festival, Armin stood beside her, proud and unbothered by the looks. He greeted the elders and helped serve water to travelers. When a group of men laughed, he turned and said, "A man's strength is not in what people say. It is in how he stands when people laugh." The men fell silent. Later that day, a government officer from the nearby town arrived. He was visiting to look into complaints about illegal marriages and mistreatment of widows. When he spoke to the villagers, stories poured out. Some exaggerated, some half true. Finally, one woman pointed to Syra. "Ask her," she said. She was sold like cattle. The officer called Syra and Armin forward. The whole village gathered to listen. Syra stood still, her hands shaking slightly. But Armin touched her arm and said softly, "Speak the truth. No one can take that from you." She took a deep breath and told everything. How her husband's family had called her cursed. How they shaved her head and laughed. How they sold her off to a broker. And how she had been handed to Armin like a forgotten object. The crowd was silent. No one moved. Even the officer's face turned dark with anger. When she finished, Armin spoke quietly. "I gave them money not because I wanted to buy her, but because I wanted to save her from them. They mocked me for marrying her, but I saw a human being, not a curse." The officer wrote down every word. "Those people will be punished," he said firmly. "No woman should be treated this way." The old man who had sold her tried to slip away through the crowd, but the officer stopped him. "You'll come with us," he ordered. The villagers murmured in agreement. Some even clapped softly. For the first time, Syra saw her in-laws pale with fear instead of pride. The officer's men took them to the jeep and drove away. The dust from the tires rose like a cloud that carried away the cruelty of the past. When the noise settled, the villagers turned to Armin and Syra. No one laughed now. One elder said, "Son, you have taught us something." "We were blind." Armin bowed his head respectfully. "I only did what should have been done long ago," he said. In the days that followed, things changed quickly. The same people who once called Syra cursed now asked her for advice. Women began sending their daughters to speak to her, to learn from her courage. Men started talking differently too, ashamed of what they once thought was normal. Syra began growing her hair again. It came in slowly, fine and dark. Every morning, Armin would leave a small flower by her mirror. She never asked why, but she always smiled when she saw it. One evening, when her hair had grown enough to cover her head, Armin said softly, "You don't have to hide anymore, but I hope you never bow your head again." She nodded, eyes full of quiet tears. Months passed and peace filled their home. Syra started teaching small children in the village, helping them read and write. She had once been treated as worthless, but now she was respected. People called her teacher, and she carried that name with grace. One afternoon, as Armin returned from the fields, he saw a group of travelers resting under the old tree near the road. One of them asked, "Is this the village where the bald bride story happened?" Armin smiled gently and said, "Yes, but it's not a story of shame. It's a story of strength. When he entered the house, Sarah was sitting by the window, brushing her short hair. She looked up at him and smiled. "You're famous now," she teased softly. He laughed and sat beside her. "No," he said. "You are." The world outside still had cruelty, still had laughter that hurt, but inside that small house, there was peace, the kind that grows from kindness, the kind that heals old wounds quietly. One evening, as the sun went down behind the hills, Syra placed a clay lamp at the doorway. Its light spread softly, glowing on the walls and the flowers outside. She looked at Armin and said, "When they shaved my head, I thought my life was over, but now I see. They only cut my hair, not my courage." Armin nodded slowly, his eyes warm. "And that courage made everyone see their own hearts," he said. From that day, people from nearby villages began visiting them, bringing their daughters, their sisters, their stories of pain and injustice. Syra listened to all of them. Sometimes she cried with them. Sometimes she told them how she survived. Every word she spoke carried quiet power, not of anger but of truth. Armin built a small room next to their house where women could meet and talk freely. They called it Syra's Corner. It became a place of hope. No one laughed there. No one whispered behind backs. Only stories were shared and strength was passed from one woman to another. Years later, when Syra's hair grew long again, she kept it simple, never hiding it under a shawl. When asked why, she would smile and say, "Because the world must see what survived." The cruel joke that began with a shaved head ended with a lesson that spread beyond the village. People who once sold shame now learned respect. And the man who had once been mocked for buying a bald bride became known as the man who restored a woman's pride. As the seasons changed and the fields turned golden again, Armin and Syra often sat outside in the evenings watching the sky turn red. He would say softly, "I thought I was buying silence, but I found a voice." She would smile and reply, "You didn't buy me, you found me." The night breeze would carry their laughter across the fields, gentle, honest, and peaceful. And in that small corner of the world, where cruelty had once lived, kindness had taken root so deep that it would never be forgotten.